Hey guys, it's me Surin, back with another video. So this is going to be a video on a topic that I've wanted to do for a while, uh, on the subject of Black Americans, descendants of American chattel slavery and genealogy. I feel like I see a lot of the times people saying, especially now that this conversation around reparations is getting like really, really serious for this upcoming 2020 elections. I see a lot of people sort of just like raising their shoulders and kind of being like, well, how will we know? How will we know who's a Black American? How will we know who can get what? And even going back a little bit further, I've just always come across a lot of people that, and wanting to have conversations about like being a Black American, being a descendant of American chattel slavery, that say stuff like, well, most Black Americans are like mixed up anyways, like most Black Americans, which we've talked about a little bit on the series, Black Americans, and on the channel a bit, people saying, this idea of like, well, most Black Americans, have a Caribbean in their family tree somewhere, or like a West Indian, or, like a Black, person from somewhere else. And it's just really, really interesting whenever I see this, because I feel like it's such a weird thing to me, right? It's like, if you're a Black American, if you're a descendant of American chattel slavery on both sides, it's not that hard to trace. You can trace genealogy, you can trace lineage. And I also feel like if you have, sort of like other type of, Black people in your family, for the most part, you would know, right? Like, especially if it's like a parent or a great grandparent or a great grandparent, people have these weird ideas about history, like as if history is so far away. And it's not that far, It's like there's me, for example, and then there's my parents, my mom and dad, for example, and then there's like my paternal grandmother, who I know very well, who is still alive to this day, and then like my paternal great-grandmother, who I knew very well, who died when I was a teenager, and her mother was a slave. So that's not that far removed. It's not, thousands of years ago. I think the way that we're taught to think about American chattel slavery really encourages this idea and this mindset of that like slavery was so long ago, and that like so many generations have passed and so much time has passed that everybody's just all mixed up, and there's just like no way of knowing, there's no way of tracking, there's no way of tracing. And that's like, number one, we do have an oral history. Like, sit down with your parents, with your grandparents, if you can, if they're still alive, if they're around, if you can reach them, if you can talk to them. You can sit down with these people, number one, and find out via an oral history where they're from, where you came from, where their parents came from. Like I said, I can trace my lineage back on both sides, paternal and maternal side, on both, like, back to two different like plantations in North Carolina. I also know that I've been very lucky because my maternal grandmother was very into genealogy and history and family trees and things of that nature when I was growing up, and this was like in the 90s, so this is even kind of like pre-internet access, like what we have now, and like pre-ancestry.com and all this stuff. And she was like doing actual like writing letters and like calling different types of like genealogy like companies, different types of like archives, like registries, like looking up papers, looking up documents, putting together a family tree for our family. And nowadays we have the internet. You have like literal companies that you can hire to even like do the legwork for you if you want to like trace your lineage back. I also find it really interesting to see people say like, well, how will Black Americans, descendants of American chattel slavery, sort of trace our history and trace our lineage, because we were seen as chattel, right? We were seen as property. We were not seen as human beings. It's like, do they not have property logs, right? It's fucking weird to think about. I'm not going to say that it's not. Like, it's absolutely fucking weird. It's absolutely fucking vile. It's absolutely fucking disturbing. And I totally understand that there's a lot of people that don't want to think about it and don't want to think about it in that way. And similar to that, there's a lot of people that, don't necessarily feel comfortable like sitting down with parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, if you have those, because you probably know that it's like maybe a touchy subject, a painful subject, talking to somebody that, left the South, for example, during the Great Migration, trying to flee, racist violence and lynchings and things of that nature, and people wanting to put things behind them. I totally understand that, but again, I also feel like if we don't do this work, I already said the theme of 2019 is legacy. And it's like, if we don't do this work in finding our legacy and in finding, again, our genealogy, our history, and our heritage, it does become lost to time. And there are, again, there's property logs. There are property logs. I have a lot of stuff that I've looked up for this video, so there is going to be tons of links in the description box, places that you can sort of start a search. And I'm also going to read some stuff, but like in addition to just like looking up your last name, or especially if it's like a more common last name, that can be hard. But typing in, you know, like your name, your parents' names, grandparents' names, if you have those, trying to like look up records. Most records, and again, public logs and things of this nature, they are public, like they are public record. Marriages are public record, land deeds are public record, business licenses and business contracts are public record, patents are public record. So again, this also comes back to too, like an oral history and lore and legends of families. You know, like, oh, if they always talk in your family about how you have a great-great-grandfather, Ramesses, I'd have just made that up, that patented an XYZ, you can go look it up, right? If they always say in your family how you guys came from this place or that place or this plantation, or you did this or you did that. A lot of the times you do have a knee-jerk reaction, just be like, all right, like drunk uncle just talking. But you can also, if you're interested, start looking these things up. Again, with the internet, it's a lot easier now to at least have a place to start, because you can just type a name into Google, type a business into Google, type a property into Google, type a place into Google, and try to work your way backwards from there. And again, speaking to family members and finding out, and you will find things out. Like, you start digging around in family, you will find things out, obviously. But I definitely think that people, again, have this mindset that as if, like, number one, slavery was so long ago, that as if it's impossible, it can't be done. And also this mindset that, like, as if all Black Americans, like, that we are, like, mixed up, which I've talked about in other videos. And I think I'm going to do, like, a whole video on this concept, because I have a lot of thoughts percolating on this concept. But it's just, like, this sort of, like, shrugging your shoulders of just, like, well, why should Black Americans get anything? Because, like, Black Americans are all, you know, there's no way to tell who's Black American. It's like most of us that are Black American on both sides, descendants of American chattel slavery, can trace it via an oral history, you know, via conversations we've had with our parents, who have had conversations with their parents, who have had conversations with their parents of, like, I remember when Aunt Bessie came here from North Carolina, and, you know, so we already have an idea of where we came from. And then also, in addition to that, utilizing the resources to find sort of, like, concrete, again, like land titles and property deeds and patents and, you know, travel logs and, again, like property logs, if you can find those. All of these things are out there. So I just don't, I'm not buying that it's so impossible, and so we should just throw up our hands at the concept of, again, like, giving Black Americans our recognition and giving us what we deserve in terms of us being our own ethnicity and having certain things coming to us and us alone via this excuse of, like, well, it's just all a melting pot and there's absolutely no way that we'll ever be able to know. That's false, right? It's bullshit. So I'm going to read you guys just, like, some conversations that I've been having and that I've also seen people having online about this type of topic. Somebody said, if you have your maternal and paternal grandparents' names, search them. They should come up on at least one census record. Make sure to put the state you think they were born or lived, put it in the any box, because census records are public records. Or if you search your paternal grandfather, their marriage license may come up and it will list your grandmother's maiden name. This was somebody saying they didn't know the name of their great-grandparents because their grandparents didn't like talking about childhood because it was something traumatic. So they were saying, like, well, if your grandparents got married and they have, like, a marriage license, then it will have, like, maiden names and possibly parents' names on there. See if you can find them on the census records, things of that nature. Black American ancestry isn't that difficult to determine because records were kept. I can trace both my maternal grandparents to South Carolina and my paternal grandparents to South Carolina and Florida. So someone else giving advice on how to find great-grandparents when you don't know their names. Look up the birth certificates of your maternal grandmother. If you know her name, one of the parents should be on the certificate. From there, you can search birth, death certificates and keep going back, connecting dates and addresses with census records. Once you get to the early 1900s, late 1800s, you will tend to see large residences with usually a white person having a ton of black sons and daughters, which was the way they recorded slaves legally on paper after it ended. So this was a conversation that was around, the original question was, how do you determine if you're, like, a Black American or not? Most Black Americans can easily trace their last relatives that were slaves in the United States. United States slavery was only ended in 1865. A good 90% of former slaves are listed on the 1867 census, which again, you have people that were previously not considered people, right? They were considered property, that now they're considered people. So for the first time, they were eligible for the census. So you can also go back and look for a population jump, right? An increase. I was even able to find a copy of my great-great-grandfather's birth certificate that showed that he was born into slavery. A lot of this stuff is public record and can easily be researched. American slavery really wasn't that long ago, to be honest. People swear we can't trace genealogy, but we can. Birth records of slaves have been recorded since 1619. Records of ownership, sale, transport, insurance, etc. also exist today. Remember I said previously in my Memphis, Tennessee slave haven video, I talked about how Aetna, the insurance company Aetna, got its start as insurers for slave ships and for slaves as a way for, like, if too many people died, or if the ship sank in a storm, if it got lost, a way for slave owners to have their property insured. That was the start of Aetna as an insurance company. They have records. A majority of American-born blacks can be traced back to a plantation and private ownership. Companies like Ancestry DNA already do work of this nature. Black people who descend from slavery from a specific country actually can document concrete numbers. You can actually do research and see what plantation owner and how much they got paid for slaves lost. Again, because here in the United States, a lot of slaveholders got compensated for lost property after the end of slavery. And again, there is documentation. There's documentation of everything. There's documentation of all this stuff. And that was actually a comment from a conversation that I saw some people having on Instagram, which again was just like, well, how can we tell, right? How can we tell? When we start talking about Black Americans, all of a sudden we can't tell. We can't tell who's who. Slate also recently ran an article on Black Americans tracing our genealogy and history, which I will, of course, include in the description box. And I just screenshotted some passages that I wanted to read you guys. For all Black American families looking to trace lineages back into slavery, the Civil War and Reconstruction period of the 1860s and 1870s is a crucial turning point. The United States Census counted free people from 1790 through 1940. For that reason, it's a mainstay of many genealogical researches and is conveniently digitized and searchable. Freed slaves only show up in the census by names starting in 1870. I traced my lineage back to a slave born in, they put the person's name, but I'm not going to read it. I traced my lineage back to a slave born in South Carolina in 1845 simply by using draft records, census records, and birth certificates. Many of us can trace our lineage back to slavery pretty easily. There's also a question of switching names, as a lot of freed slaves changed their names afterwards because they didn't want to be associated with that anymore, and they had a passage about that as well. One way to identify an ancestor who might have switched names is to look at military service records and pension applications from the Union Army. Often, in applying for pensions, Black veterans clarified the discrepancy between the names on their service records and the names they considered their own. When a pension applicant contains an explanation like this, a statement from the ancestor saying, the military used my slave owner's surname, but my real name is this, that's good evidence pointing the researcher to the slave owner's identity. There was a ton of great information and also really great links and resources, again, in this article, which I will have linked. But you even, you had like enslaved people that were running away and joining the Union Army and giving a name. That is a record. It is there. Once you identify the evidence of who the former owner was, you're no longer chasing the Black American. You're chasing the white person who was the slave owner. This is where the genealogical research process most painfully reflects the blunt historical truth about hereditary chattel slavery. The researcher is not looking for evidence of the existence of people. She is tracing the way that property changed hands. Think about any property you own today, your house or your car. There are records associated with that property. So there are records associated with slaves. So again, I also know that there's a lot of resistance because this is like very painful stuff to talk about, but I definitely think it's something that we have to wade through because these conversations about descendants of American chattel slavery as our own group, as our own collective, as our own ethnic group, are not going away, about our culture, about us claiming our culture, claiming our history, claiming our heritage, claiming who we are. It's not going to stop. It's not going to go away. It doesn't matter how many times you guys say that it's divisive, or how many times you guys say it doesn't matter, we're all black, it's melting pot, it's this, it's that. To me, when people say that type of stuff, it's just a very disingenuous argument, because people can't say what they really want, which is just that they don't like us and they don't feel like we are our own culture, and they don't think that we deserve anything, and that we just meant to stay in our place in the social hierarchy at the bottom, to get ahead on our backs, using our culture, using our art, using our academia, using our activist strategies. Like, as long as we're at the bottom, everybody can leapfrog over us. Anybody non-black can be like, well, hey, at least I'm not black, and leapfrog ahead of us. And anybody that's not a black American, a descendant of American chattel slavery, can be like, well, at least I'm not like them lazy fucking black Americans, and also get ahead of us, while utilizing stuff that's for them as immigrants, as well as using stuff that's for us, because they could just be like, well, I'm black, so I'm automatically a black American. That's not a real thing. Anybody could be it. Like, we're in like the perfect position at the bottom for white people to get over us, for non-black persons of color to get over us, for non-black Americans to get over us. We're at the perfect place. So everybody is like colluding against us. Like, that's just what it is. I'm sorry. And so I'm just like not with the bullshit anymore, and I haven't been. I've been doing these videos. My very first video on the subject was from like 2015, and I have the whole Be a Gang playlist if you want to check out more videos on this topic. They're all in there. But yeah, it's just like a lot of excuses, a lot of like false equivalences, a lot of like, I don't understand, how will we tell? You know, very smart people all of a sudden get real stupid when you start talking about this type of stuff. You know, like, you can trace your lineage to find out that you're motherfucking 119th Cherokee, but we can't fucking trace property records and lineages of black Americans. It's ridiculous. We're going to continue having these conversations, and we're going to continue understanding that, again, we are our own ethnicity. We are our own culture. We are our own collective. And that's not to like down anybody else, because other people have their own shit too, and it's perfectly fine. It's only an issue when we start saying who we are and claiming what is owed to us, that all of a sudden all these questions about who we are and how can we tell and how do we know, how will I know, Whitney, like all these questions start coming out. So I wanted to do this video on tracing lineage and on genealogy. Again, I will include tons of links and resources in the description box. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Peace.